This is actually really good because, well, we're just both interested. I mean, we're totally curious on what your life is like.
But that is our first question. Our first question was to find out, are you a family man? What is your life like? What kind of person are you? What's your
that's
job?
good. You know, I have a lot of videos that are all about subjects. You know, and I suspect it probably will be well received to have one that's a little more, what they could say in the sports, up close and personal, right?
Yes.
Kind of a
and we want
interview.
We want people to see that you're not like, you know, I don't know, an oozingly eccentric scientist.
Yeah,
like, I don't know how else to say that.
That's the only kind of thing is that you get. Yeah, go on.
We just want to make people see, like, yeah, this is just a down to earth person, like, you know, who has a family and who has a career and has a sense of humor and is not strange like me and Elliot.
Yeah. A normal eccentric, not an eccentric eccentric.
Right, something like that.
Well, it just depends on how you look at it. You know, if you look from one aspect, I seem like a pretty normal person. You know, I'm a scientist, always been a scientist. You know, I think that way, I live that way, I breathe that way. On the other hand, you look at it from the other way, from the opposite direction, you probably won't find anybody any weirder than I am. You know, as far as you know, things I've done, you know, what I've do, things I've learned, and so on. And it's just. So it depends on which way you look at it. So it's both, really. You know,
you're definitely right about that, because there's plenty of people who just do consciousness and plenty of people who just do physics. So yeah, that kind of does make you especially stranger that you would do both. More eccentric than usual, definitely.
Mm-hmm.
The joke that I tell is that there's only one thing that you can say that I find aggravating, that tweaks my ego. There's only one thing I don't want you to call me. You know what that is?
Interesting?
Normal.
Yeah.
Call me anything, but don't call me normal. That's kind of a standing joke.
I love it. It's fantastic.
Definitely.
Well, I mean, that's
you
definitely
certainly
why we're
aren't
here.
normal.
No, you're the furthest thing from it. In fact, we wanted to open up the next question with, so here we go. Let's see. Oh yeah, simple enough. So when did you realize that you were playing a video game?
Oh, okay. When did I realize that? You know, I had already started writing the book, the My Big Toe book. I'd already started writing it from the metaphysical side. And, you know, there's a lot there about consciousness and awareness and that sort of thing. So I started writing that. And I ran across another writer. Let me see if I can bring his name up here. I mentioned him in my book.
Fredkin?
No.
Dooch? Dooch? David Dooch?
No, it's not a physicist. He was just a guy writing a book. He wrote a book called, it wasn't a theory of everything, but something like that. Universal Reality Theory. Who was that? Steve Kaufman. Steve Kaufman wrote Universal Reality Theory, something like that. I don't really remember now. I do mention him in the book, and I mention his book. But I just was kind of browsing around the internet, and I ran across this, and, you know, I probably Googled reality or something to see what would come up, since I was writing something about that. I hadn't gotten real serious writing yet. You know, it wasn't to the point that I knew that it was 3 books and a trilogy and whatever. I was just kind of putting together some thoughts about consciousness and that kind of thing. And he had a book, and his was not so much a big toe. His was just trying to derive some of the equations of physics with his kind of a geometry method that he had. But one of the things he said that kind of rang my bell was that everything in his model started from, what can we call it, from dual pairs, I guess, you know, this way versus that way.
Duality.
And that was kind of his basic philosophical starting point, was a this versus that. And he started from this versus that idea, and from that duality of thing, and it doesn't matter really what it was just a thing and a different thing. And as long as you could have things and different things, and he could build up his structure out of duality. So that was his thing, and I kind of read his book, and that sort of kind of made sense what he was doing. It was not real general. It wasn't a theory of consciousness. It didn't take in a whole lot, but it did come up with a couple of basic physics equations he got out of his geometry of how he related the this and that, dualities at the root. Well, when I read that, I thought about it for a while, and a couple of days I was kind of in a meditation state, which I'm in about as much as I'm not. I kind of live there. So when I say that, I know people have the idea, meditation state, that means he goes, sits down and crosses his legs and, does this and that, and he meditates for an hour, but that's not really what I mean. I'm in and out of meditation states all the time, as I talk, as I do other things. But I would kind of drifted off. I think I was in bed going to sleep and was wandering around thinking about that, and suddenly it occurred to me that this and that duality was a 1 and a 0. And as soon as that hit, it was, oh, that's it. So it was one of those things. It was a big aha moment. And that's not the way he, does it. It's not his thing. He doesn't have it that way. But as soon as I got that idea that it's a 1 and a 0, then it's like I'd been building this big, structure out of dominoes, but none of them actually ever touched each other. They were all these pieces. I had this piece and that piece and the other piece. I had all these little pieces all over the place that basically from my own research and consciousness, the places I'd gone, things I'd done, research I'd done. So I kind of knew the overall structure of it, but I didn't have the part that tied it all together. Was still looking for that piece when I got his, when I looked at his thing and his this and that turned into a 1 and 0 for me. And then that just, laid it all out. Then I could see you got a system. It's a digital system. It has memory. It has processing. It's aware, it's conscious. And then all the pieces, well, then I can see why this, did that. And suddenly I hit the one domino with the 1 and the 0, and all the other dominoes through the whole structure all fell down. It kind of all made sense. I mean, it still took me probably another year to put all the pieces together and decide, how it all worked. That happened, it happens. And since I've written the books, I've added new things to them and decided more about how things work. But that's kind of where that idea of the 1s and 0s came from. It just, I got the right kind of nudge, I guess, which is probably why Google took me to that site, right. And I looked at kind of, it's one of those things that you kind of set up because you right. need that little nudge. Yeah. I got that nudge, and that was the thing that tied everything together, because now you have a system, and it's an aware system, and now it's simple. Why is it the way it is? Well, it just evolved to be that way, you see. It's just a natural system. It doesn't have to be mystical. It doesn't have to be, otherworldly. It's just a system evolving like any other system that's evolving. It's just trying not to die. It's trying to keep going on. It's trying to evolve rather than turn into randomness. So with that as the background, the rest of it fell together. And then where we were relative to that system, what we were doing, that we were in a virtual reality, and why we would be in that virtual reality, and why would the system want to make a virtual reality, why it had to do that, because there's a logical flow. It doesn't work very well if it doesn't make a virtual reality. You see, it doesn't work very well if it stays one monolithic thing rather than break itself apart into a multi-celled thing, because, and the physics will tell you why that doesn't work. You have multiple things, you have more degrees of freedom, more ways that they can go together, more opportunity, if you will, for things to be put together in creative ways. If you just have one thing, it just is what it is. You're done. You see, but if you have lots of different things interacting with each other, suddenly you have a lot more novelty and a lot more potential. So your entropy goes down. So you can see, why did it have to do this, and why did it need the virtual reality, and what are we doing in this virtual reality, and why do we go round and round the cycle with it, and how all that works. Just all then over the next year or so, put that all together and realized that it made better sense than anything that I had read anywhere else suddenly I realized that it was explaining almost everything. It not only explained consciousness, but it explained all the things that I had done in consciousness, all the experiments that I'd done, all that stuff now could relate to each other. You could see how it was all part of a bigger pattern. And then I guess we were about, 3 or 4 years into after the book had been published. And I was corresponding with Ted, Ted of the forum.
Yeah.
And Ted was in his mind, he was working with the fractal idea.
Right.
This is, it's all fractal. The pieces get smaller and smaller. It's just repetition of the evolutional process. And as he was doing that, he was talking about, if you look in and he came up with his concept of the VRRE, which is the VR rendering engine. I think that's what he called it. That's the thing. You talk about a game. You have a rendering engine, right, that sends out the data that makes the pictures. That's your game. The game gets rendered. Well, he said, if this is a virtual reality, then let's talk about the rendering process. So in the process, thinking about this and the fractal process, he said, like you look at the woods, and all that has to be rendered to you is this kind of fuzzy green outline, with brown sticks in it. And then you get closer, then it has to show you individual trees and individual leaves. And then you get closer, it has to show you the veins in the leaves. And then you get closer, you see, and he was seeing that the rendering machine had to render more and more detail as that detail was required, right? And of course, that made sense, that wasn't new, that wasn't too novel to me, but it was a good way of putting it in this metaphor of the rendering engine. So I thought that was a very positive thing. I like that. But then the more I thought about it, as he was saying it, I can't remember exactly what it was or exactly what it said, but this was another thing where it was a nudge. Something just clicked together in my head after I thought about that for a while. And it was, this not only describing consciousness, this is describing physics too. That's the same way the world works, That's the way the double slit experiment works. That's just describing, the foundation of quantum mechanics. Basically it's about information, and you only render the information as you need it. And before you need it, it's just probability, you see? Oh, well, there's double slit. You see, so I was looking, Ted was telling me his rendering engines material. And it just occurred to me that that's the exact same process that quantum mechanics is based on. The information's the key. It stays probability, until the measurement's required and so on. So then I started to put that together and realized that the fundamental physics problems that are out there are all answered with this same theory. I just probably a week ago, I ran into a website. I don't know how I ran into it. Somebody probably sent it to me. I get lots of stuff sent to me besides hundreds of emails. A lot of those emails say, you ought to go to this site, and tell me what you think. Read this book and tell me what you think. And it's like, yeah, right, I'll read that. If I can read the book and the time it takes me to write something of 500 or less characters, I'll give it a try. But anyway, I did look at the site, and it said, the 9 most pressing or the most important physics problems, unanswered physics problems. Right. And it had 9 problems that physicists just don't, they're stymied by them. They just don't know why. It's like, what is dark energy? What is dark matter? Why does a double slit experiment work? And it went down this list of these things. And as I went down through the 9, there weren't any of them that weren't obvious as to how they worked. This same theory that explains consciousness and the subjective world, because consciousness is a subjective world. Your consciousness is, it's you. It's subjective. So the same science of the subjective that explains consciousness and the metaphysics and the paranormal and all that stuff fall out of it as being normal. The same virtual reality idea also answers these questions of science. It tells you, why does the double slit experiment work like that? And it's obvious, it's a virtual reality and it's probabilistic. It's not a deterministic virtual reality. Everything remains in probability until a measurement's made. Well, with TED, until you look at that leaf real closely, you don't need to have the veins rendered. You see, only when you do the measurement do you get the data. Well, that's why the double slit experiment works that way. It's the same sort of thing. There are no particles. There are no massy little particles. It's just probability distribution until you look, and as soon as you measure the particle, then now you got a particle. You see, now you got a particle manifested in this physical reality with a physical particle, and all it does is what physical particles do, which is travel in a straight line unless interacted by a force, you see. So that's what you have to have. But before you do that measurement and find that particle, all you have is a probability distribution. So probability distributions don't have any trouble having a certain amount of probability of being here and a certain amount of probability being there. So you get the two slits, and then how that probability interacts as it goes through. It's going to interact with itself, and all that's just standard, that's just easy physics, easy math to figure out how that works. And you end up then with these bands of light, which is the diffraction pattern from the double slit. Basically, that band of light are just the probability function of where where this particle might be. In other words, the measurement comes at the screen, right, where that diffraction pattern is. That's where the measurement's made when it hits that final screen, not when it goes through the slits, because nobody's measuring when it goes through the slits. So when it hits that screen, you got a particle. And where's the particle going to be? Well, where's it most likely to be? Well, right there's where it's most likely to be, so you'll get a spot there. But it's a little less likely, but still likely to be over here, so you get a smaller spot over there. And there's some likelihood that it'd be here, you get a spot there, and there's no likelihood at all that it's going to be between those two spots, because that's where the probability cancels itself out, you see. So what you get, your diffraction pattern is just a pattern of the probability of where this particle will jump into our reality. Where will it be rendered in our reality based on probability? You see? Ta-da! You see, so that answers that big question, and that's the root question at the base of quantum mechanics. And quantum mechanics, derives Newtonian mechanics, and quantum mechanics basically derives, most of everything else except relativity. So that if you got that one, you almost have it all as far as the physics goes. And then you go over to the relativity side, which is the other half that the quantum mechanics won't tell you about, and that then falls out of the fact that it's a virtual reality, and we talk about C being a constant. Relativity theory is based on that. It's that one assumption that C is a constant. And nobody knows why C ought to be a constant. It just is. Now, when I say a constant, I'm using, I don't mean that necessarily precisely that it has to be a constant. There's several reasons why C can vary from time to time. But the way it varies is out in the 5th or 6th or 10th or 20th decimal place, It could vary in jumps, but we can get into that if you like, because there's this kind of a big deal now, because Rupert Sheldrake or somebody said that, C is not constant. And so I'm hearing that a lot. Rupert says C is not constant, and you say it is. What's the problem here?
Right.
Well, it's because when I say it's constant, I don't mean to an infinite number of decimal places.
Right.
We're just talking about it doesn't change much.
Right.
We call it constant,
Right.
So constant the metaphor as not constant the precise thing. There is nothing that's constant. If you get to that point, there is no such thing as a constant.
It's the same as infinity.
We can't measure the speed of light to 100 decimal places. We can't do that. Our equipment only measures it so far, and after that, you say, here's the speed of light, plus or minus, this error, right? There's always something that you don't know about it. So if you get right down to it, just the concept of constant, it's like the concept of infinity. It doesn't really exist. So Rupert is right. C doesn't have to be constant, and it isn't. But what happens is if you have a virtual reality, it's like any other video game. It's a dynamic game. Things happen in time. So the game has to have a clock. It has to have a delta t that ticks and you run through the code, and next delta t, you just increment everything in time a little bit. So it's a time-based, that's called dynamic, simulation. If it wasn't dynamic simulation, nothing would move. See, there'd be no before and after. Everything would be static. So in order to have a simulation where things happen, it has to be a dynamic, time-based simulation. So you've got this outer time loop in your simulation. That's the delta t. Now, if that's constant, okay, now it doesn't have to be constant. Again, it can change out in the, in the 30th decimal place, and who cares? You see, the larger consciousness system is keeping a regular beat, but it's not perfect either. Mm-hmm. You see, it doesn't have infinite number of decimal places because no real thing has an infinite number of anything. So you've got this C, and yeah, it's going to wobble around and change a little bit, some, because, this is the way it is. Even when you do a simulation and you calculate things, on our computers, they change. Everything when you put in pi is a constant, right? Mm-hmm. And people can calculate the number of decimal places out, but the pi you use in your computer isn't 300 decimal places. The pi you use in your computer, if it's single precision, it's 8 decimal places. If it's double precision, it's 16. If it's quadruple precision, it's 32. And that's it. And if you're in quadruple precision and you get 32 decimal places, well, what's in that 33rd decimal place? Garbage. You see, it varies. Well, the larger consciousness system has a delta t, and it's not calculating everything to infinite precision, so it's got the same thing we do with computers, and that depends on how much resources you want to spend on it. If you make a simulation, you might have that delta t very, very small because you have little precise things that you want to measure. Like I say in my book, if you have a simulation of a missile flying very, very fast, then your delta t has to go very fast, or otherwise your rocket's going to disappear here and appear over here, disappear here and appear there, because it moves so far. It may move a mile, during that delta t, between your delta t. So it would be like it was jumping through space in that simulation. Well, you don't want that. You want to make the simulation so tight that it moves just a pixel, and then the next pixel, and the next pixel, and then it looks to you like it's a nice, smooth thing, but it's still jumping through space. It's just jumping through space a pixel at a time, you see? So you make your delta t as small as you need to. And that's the same with this. The delta t is as small as it needs to be when it needs to be. Well, what happens is that we keep looking deeper and deeper into our environment. Nice. So for a long time, how big a delta t did we need? What was it rendering? Well, it was rendering a bunch of cavemen and a bunch of dinosaurs and other kinds of things. It didn't have to render anything much faster than a bird could fly, right? It didn't have to render a lot of precise detail. Nobody had an electron microscope. The cavemen weren't, into telescopes either.
Wow.
You see, they didn't have any of that stuff. So the rendering was, why would you render a game, 1 million times just to move 1 pixel? It doesn't matter.
Wow.
You see? So you don't want your delta t to be any smaller than your pixel, because otherwise you're wasting time calculating things that you can't even display, because nothing happens on your display until you've moved the pixel. You don't want to do 50 calculations of that distance between pixels, right? So you pick a delta t that's what you need. And nobody would pick one any greater, any smaller than they needed, because it's a waste of computer resources. You don't just calculate stuff because you can. You calculate the stuff, to suit your problem. So would C change? Sure, C might change, because why? They need to decrease the delta t a little bit. You see, because now we're looking into the picky details of things, and they have to render picky details of things. The other thing is that you have your quantum of volume, our space. Okay. It's quantum of space. That's our pixel. Okay, that's our volume. Our pixel of volume, if you will. We're used to things being on flat screens, so we have little pixels of area on a flat screen. But you have a pixel of volume here in the 3D world. Okay. Now, on our screen, do all the pixels have to be the same size? Well, they wouldn't have to. But what would happen if they were different sizes? Well, things would smear, right? You wouldn't have this. It's just like the distance. You want everything to move in very nice little uniform pieces. You don't want it to take a big jump and then a little jump. But if the pixels, say, over over a part of your face were huge. Let's say the pixel, was 4 inches by 4 inches, right? Then in that 4-inch thing, there'd be one color, one intensity, right? It wouldn't have much detail in that square 4 inches. And what would happen? You just kind of, in that part of it, you would just kind of smear out, right? So, and another part would maybe have high res, and another part would be in between. So if the pixels were all different sizes, you'd have a real goofy monitor. See? What you want is all the pixels to be the same so that everything's uniform. So your reality is not what I call a funhouse reality. Looking in a funhouse mirror, how it distorts everything. Pixels of different sizes distort the reality. Makes it look goofy. So we're here to learn. We need feedback. The reality needs to be dependable, and having goofy reality where things jump through space and where things, are come and go, and their amount of resolution that you have doesn't compute, right? You don't make simulations that way. So when you make a simulation, you pick a delta t, and that's your delta t. It's a constant. There's no real purpose for changing it other than when the action speeds up and you need a smaller delta t. Or the action slows down, you can do one. So every once in a while, you can make kind of a major change with it, not a problem. So if you take the volume, take the cube root of it, which is just again another metaphor, because you take a cube root of volume, you get a distance. So we'll call that the fundamental unit of distance. Well, the idea is that you have now these things that are basically constant. Distance is constant units of volume, so we have a nice picture. And we have these constant times that are small enough that things don't seem to be jumping through space. Well, if those two are constant, and in any decent simulation they are constant so that you don't get goofy stuff, then c is a constant, because what's c? C is how quickly you can move information from pixel to pixel to pixel to pixel continuously. Okay, well, every delta t you can move 1 pixel. Next delta t, you can move another pixel. Can you move it any faster than that? No, because you only get a chance to move it every delta t. And you can't move it any more than a pixel. Again, unless you want a funhouse thing where things are jumping around through space. They're teleporting around in your environment. Well, we don't want that. So if you want a normal virtual reality where things don't teleport around and the picture is good, then you have to have basically a delta t that's constant and a delta v volume, or this delta length, that's constant. So c is constant, you see. But it doesn't, I mean that constant kind of general sense of the word constant. It doesn't mean that it can't change. It doesn't mean it's constant out to infinite decimal places. So it's got the same error problem as we do in computing things. It's only but so accurate, and you don't do quadra precision if you don't need it, because that's it's 4 times the calculation, you see. Now the bytes are, you have 8-bit bytes. So if it's quadra precision, you have 4 of those 8-bit bytes. You have 32 bits in a byte. You see, and it gets more processing time, more crunching, more cycles the processor has to go through. So you don't use any more than you need to. So you have this, basically now we have a constant c. And because we have a constant c, then relativity works, because that's the key to relativity. Now this constant c, you see, is a real odd thing, because everything else has additive velocities. Everything else that we know of in this virtual reality, the velocities add. In other words, you're in a car going 10 miles an hour, you reach out the window, you throw a ball in the forward direction of the car, 10 miles an hour, the ball's going 20 miles an hour because velocities add. It's got the 10 mile an hour of the car, plus it's got the 10 mile an hour of your throw, and the ball relative to the ground is moving 20 mile an hour. Well, that works that way for everything. It just makes sense. Velocities are additive. It's not that way with light. With light, you put your light on that car and you drive your car at, half the speed of light, and then you flip on your flashlight out the window and shine it ahead. Guess what? The light is still going just the speed of light. It's not going any faster. You see, it's called invariant under the motion of the base of the frame that it's in. So light is invariant under the velocity of the frame. It always goes c.
And that's Einstein right there, you're saying, is that Einstein's whole idea is based on...
That.
There you go.
That. Okay, that's it. Once you get this assumption, Einstein's whole thing, like you say, his whole base is based on that. Once you get this idea that light is always constant. So here you're traveling in a spaceship, like I say, a half the speed of light or 9/10 the speed of light.
Right.
You reach your flashlight out the window, you can shine it in the forward direction, in the backward direction, straight up, straight down, any way you want, and that light always goes C. Matters not how fast you're going. See, that is counterintuitive.
Yeah.
We say, how does that work? Why is it like that? Well, nobody believed that it could be like that. That was impossible. You see, and that's why we made up things. When we don't understand and we think something's impossible and it must be the way we believe it should be, what we do is we make up stuff to make it work out. See, so what they did then is they said, well, there's ether, that's all through space, and the ether's drug with us, and that's why it seems like it's like that, because this ether's being drug around with the planet. So they make up all this stuff so that the equations will work out right, and you don't have to change your theory.
Oh.
See, so ether is a fudge factor.
Gotcha.
You see, you just make up the fudge so that your concept works. Oh, reality is just the way I thought it was. You see, there's this ether thing that makes it. See, so, well, what Einstein says, there isn't any ether. Speed of light is a constant, period.
Gotcha.
It doesn't matter. And everybody said, that's ridiculous. And he said, yeah, but look, here's the logical ramifications of that. So he did a little algebra, and out came special relativity. There was time dilation, there was length contraction, there was all these crazy things that people said, see, you do have a ridiculous idea, you get a ridiculous answer. And then what happens, they did some experiments, and guess what? Time dilated, length contracted, and all the things that Einstein said actually happened. And then he went from, the village idiot to a genius because he was right. Well, nobody knew why he was right. So everybody just, science says, yeah, C is a constant. And again, they know that doesn't mean, actually they do. They don't have the idea that a virtual reality can change that delta T because your measurements get finer and finer. Therefore, you need a faster thing to make it. They don't get that. So they think it ought to really be constant, period. The end forever, infinite decimal places. Of course, it isn't. It isn't like that. But it is generally a constant. In the general sense of the word, that's what we're saying.
So does that mean that light as a phenomenon is this standard that the virtual reality of phenomenon that's not light is reflected off of or referenced to or some such thing?
No, all it means is that, you're in a virtual reality, just computations. Okay. So in this virtual reality, there's a couple of things you have to do. You have to spec how fast your processor has to go. Okay. You need to know your throughput. Well, otherwise you can't spec this computer, this rendering engine, if you don't know what your throughput has to be and how much data you're going to have to handle, how fast you have to get it through there. Well, the two things that define that is how small a chunk is your volume, because that's how many points do you have to address. Okay. So how many pixels are on your screen?
Okay.
Well, that's how many points you have to light up.
Gotcha.
You see, for your picture. Okay, there are 23 million pixels in this thing. Well, I got to send 23 million signals to that screen every so often. All right, now the second thing is, what's your refresh rate? How quickly do I have to refresh those 23 million pixels? Okay, well, that's your delta T. You see, that specs your refresh rate. Every delta T you can refresh, whatever. Your throughput and how much data you have to deal with is how small pixels do you have. Gotcha. Now, the delta T in how fast does it have to go, like we said, depends on how fine a simulation do you want it to be, how much detail, how much resolution do you need. And the delta, the delta volume is how much resolution do you need in space? How much resolution do you need in time? And those two will tell you what your data load is and your throughput, you see? So this is what specs the virtual reality. And when you do that, because you have a constant delta V, we talked about, you have a constant delta t, again, constant in quote marks, right? Delta t to suit the situation, then you divide those. Okay, the speed of light is the cube root of that delta volume, which is a distance, divided by the delta t, and that's the time it takes to move one pixel to the next pixel to the next pixel. That's as fast as you can move information through this system. That's the speed of light. Okay? So that's why we have the speed of light. That's why it's a, quote, constant, but it's also why it doesn't have to be constant, and why you can change with the error in the computation, and it can change by actually modifying what the delta t is and what the delta v is based on how big people are diving into it. Now, you get an electron microscope, you start doing atom smashing, at a big accelerator. Now you need delta V's and delta T's that are really, really small to render these very small events. Otherwise, you couldn't render them. They happen in one, 100,000th of a second or something. So if you don't have a delta T that's smaller than that, you can't render it.
So are you suggesting that, phenomena like quarks don't necessarily exist at all? Particles don't necessarily exist at all?
Are they waiting to be found? Does the system make them up on the fly?
Yeah, you just make them up on the spot as they're needed.
Yeah, well, both. You see, no, particles don't exist. Mass doesn't exist.
Right, here we go.
Space doesn't exist. These are all just computations in a computer. You see, there's some computer, and you talk about space. Okay, that's 100 miles over there. Well, that's just a calculation. I mean, you can go into. Look at the space that you have in World of Warcraft. Right? You got to go over the mountain, through the vale, through the tunnel. You got to go through the woods. You get killed. You end up in a graveyard, and you got to run all the way back to where the battle was. All this is distance and space. Is there any distance in the computer? Where is that distance? It's just a computation. It's an illusion. That's the same here. There is no such thing as physical space. It's just a calculation. You see, it doesn't really exist. Now we have particles. When we make a measurement, we send enter, say, a particle to one of those slits. We make a measurement. That particle is not a particle. It's just a probability distribution until somebody looks at it. Somebody makes the measurement, and when somebody makes the measurement, then the system has to render something, or they don't measure anything, right? But this is a virtual reality. It has a rule set. So they make the measurement. The system says, oh, there's a measurement. We got to render something physical there in that measurement. And why? Because it's probable. Okay, now you turn off the machine. You turn off the laser that's shooting the pulses, and somebody makes a measurement. They don't get anything. Why? Because it's not probable that anything would be there. So it's all based on probability. So when it's probable, okay, the laser fires out a photon. The photon gets to the slit. Now, the probability you're going to find a photon at the slit is high if you measure it. So if you do measure it, oh, there it is, and it travels in a straight line and hits. Okay, now you don't measure it. Well, if you don't measure it, why would the system render things just for the hell of it? It only renders things because somebody's making the measurement. Somebody wants to know. So, it's just like World of Warcraft. It doesn't go off rendering things somewhere else on the map that nobody's playing. Why would it do that? That's just wasting cycles. It's like nobody's playing there, nothing's happening there, but we're going to make all these trees and monsters running around in it and birds flying, and we'll do all that anyway just because we like doing it. Now, of course, it doesn't work that way. It's only when a player's there, that server is idle if there are no players. The service is just sitting there waiting for a player. As soon as there's a player and the player pops up in a certain place, then that place has to be rendered to that player. Another player pops in, and now the same place and that other player has to be rendered to each other, you see, and so on. So it only is rendering what people are looking at, measuring, doing. So you have that particle, that photon. There is no photon. It's just a probability of a photon. And then when they do that measurement, they find a photon. Now it's a particle. It's in this reality frame. It has to act like a particle. But if you don't measure it, it's not rendered. It's still just probability. That's why the probability can go through both slits. And you'll find people saying, the particle goes through both slits, and say, oh, well, that's weird. How does a particle go through both slits? Particle doesn't go through both slits. There is no particle. The probability of a particle goes through both slits. And then they look at the screen where the particle hits. Well, now it's another measurement. Something's going to hit, and you're going to detect a hit. And we know we fired something. and we know there's this big screen over there, so we're going to get a hit somewhere. Where's it going to land? Well, what's the probability to land here? 0. Well, it won't land there. What's the probability it's going to land here? Oh, that's pretty high, so it hits there. And there's probability spread all over, and there's places where the probability is 0, and places where it's different values, and the particles will all just hit according to that probability, because there's thousands and thousands of these particles sent in, and one will hit here and then one will hit over there. This thing doesn't draw a diffraction pattern by drawing one line and the next line and the next line. A particle hits here and there and there and there. It's just kind of all over the place until after you fired enough, thousands and thousands of particles in, they all kind of congregate here, nothing here, and then here, and nothing there, and here, and the number of particles it hits is the most here in the center, and then a little less here, and a little less, and a little less. So you get this thing that has the big hump, and then it goes down. I don't know if you can see my hands here. I'll try to make them on the screen. You see this big hump, and then it goes down, and then you have a little hump, and then a little hump, and a little hump off the edge. That's a diffraction pattern. Mm-hmm. That's just the pattern of probability of where these things might go, given that some of the probability could go through either slit because it was just probability. You see, it's not a particle. So we don't have this, how the hell did that particle go through both slits at the same time? Wow, weird science, Well, it's not like that. It's simple. It's just probability. So the probability can go through both slits. It's just the probability of being somewhere. We don't know where it is. It doesn't know where it is either because it's not a particle, you see. It's nowhere. It's just a probability. So that, when Ted was telling me this stuff about the microscope or the telescope or the binoculars, and he was going down into this view, and things were being rendered as they required to be rendered. I said, well, of course, I knew, we knew that, da-da-da-da-da. But somehow, when Ted said it back to me, it wasn't anything particularly novel or new or whatever, but it was a new time of hearing it, I guess. And when I just heard it that time, bingo, there's science. And, you see, so we look at this, so I'm looking at these 9 things that are the big physics problems. And the first one is dark energy, and the second one's dark matter. And what are dark energy and dark matter? They're just like ether. They're fudge.
Right. It seems
the equations don't fit, It's like they've got, they have their own math that they've done, their logic, and they say, this is reality, and we know it. Yeah. So then they take their math and they say, well, let's see, 2 and 5 equals 6.
Right.
And then it's, 2 and 5 equals 6? Well, that's not right. Well, that's the way we measured it. Well, there must be something wrong with, there couldn't be anything wrong with our theory. No, we understand the world really well. Couldn't anything be wrong with our theory, There's this magic black number that nobody can see and nobody can measure. It's this magic black thing that's invisible, and we add that in, and then we'll get the right answer. You see? There we have black energy, and we have black matter and all this stuff. They're fudge factors in order to make the old theory work. Just like ether made the old theory work. And it's mostly nonsense. The problem is that nobody wants to take the other approach and says, well, if our old theory doesn't get the right answer, maybe there's something wrong with it. Maybe it's not right. Maybe we've gone now to an area that's outside. Well, it's right most of the time over here, but now we're looking at these bigger questions and bigger things, and maybe there's some about our theory that doesn't stretch that far. Maybe we need to expand our theory to take in a bigger picture, but for some reason, nobody ever thinks like that. What they think of is, well, it didn't come out right, so it's got to be bigger than, it just wouldn't work otherwise. Our theory would be wrong. And, we got black matter, we got ether, we got magic that nobody can see and nobody can smell and nobody can touch, but it's there. It has to be there. Otherwise, the theory wouldn't be right. And we know the theory has to be right. So that's what's going on with these things. They measure stuff. They look at the universe and the rate at which it's expanding. And they say, in order to do that, see, gravity sucks everything together, right? All the mass attracts. Well, why is this stuff blowing apart then if it's all supposed to It's all supposed to, attract.
Yeah.
Okay, there was a big bang and it got pushed out, but it ought to be de-accelerating, right?
Exactly.
Because this gravity is like sticky stuff that's pulling, it's like chewing gum, right? It's all pulling itself back together. So why does it continue to accelerate as it expands? Why isn't it slowing down and then coming back?
Right.
And once they thought that, and they called when it comes back the big crunch. And at the big crunch would wad it all up again and then blow back out again, you see? So they had this thing went like a yo-yo, back and forth was the theory, but they had to throw that out when it wasn't slowing down. It's accelerating. It keeps going out. Well, how does that work? Man, well, there must be this secret black matter that nobody knows, and this must be strange matter that's opposite gravity. It repels rather than attracts, and so they make up this stuff that suits them to make the equations work, rather than saying, maybe we just don't have the right approach here, folks, you see. But so how is it that universe can just keep on expanding like that and accelerating? It's like, geez, guys, this is a simulation. Could you make a universe in a simulation that just expanded?
Sure.
Just because you wanted it? It's just a number. Hey, acceleration, we know how to write the equations for that. You just write out the equation and it'll keep on accelerating. And we can also use gravity too, because that's works pretty fine over here. But we can ignore the fact that, the gravity would suck it back on this big scale, because really nobody's looking out there anyway, and da-da-da-da-da. And it doesn't matter because this is my simulation, and I like this system, it works good for me. So you don't have to, you can make a simulation do pretty much whatever you want. You want your people to fly in a simulation? Well, World of Warcraft, they have these lions with wings, right? And they fly around, you jump on their back and fly around. How do they do that? That's impossible. Lions can't fly. Gee, there must be magic lions with, black matter in their bodies that repulse gravity to do that. It's just, it's nonsense. Come on. The program's just written so the damn things fly. That's the way it is, So that's kind of where, that's how we have a lot of these physics problems. They're just fudge because the people don't want to admit that what they know so far isn't all of it, that there isn't something else major out there that they don't understand. And because they don't want to go there, because it'll break their, it'll break their pretty little theory that so far has, given them all the right answers in this smaller set of things.
Sure.
And that's the same reason that when Einstein first said C was a constant, people had the same reaction. Impossible, doesn't make any sense. And then when he predicted time dilation and length contraction and mass would get greater as the speed got more, none of those things made any sense. And it was like, nah, this guy's nuts. That couldn't happen. But fortunately, experiment could show those things. So they did the experiment. They took a piece of cesium, like a cesium clock, and they put one on a satellite and ran it around at high speed and then said, what time is it? And they had the other half of that same piece of cesium ticking away here on the Earth, and guess what? The one going faster ticked slower. Uh-oh. That's what Einstein said, and enough of those things, were done that Einstein's relativity now, of course, is a standard. It's acceptable. It's the status quo because all of the things he predicted happen. And but meanwhile, it was impossible. Things are impossible until you change the paradigm. Once you change the paradigm, and here the paradigm was that speed of light's constant. Had no idea why, but once you see it's a virtual reality, you see, once you get the idea that it's just information, then of course it's going to be constant. That's just how fast you can move the data. It's because delta t is going to be quote unquote constant, and delta v is going to be quote unquote constant, unless of course the simulation needs to change them because it needs to render at a higher resolution.
Gotcha. So
so we see that it is constant, but that Sheldrake's right. It has changed now and then, and you can see why. But there are reasons for changing it. Now, could you have, and here's another reason for changing delta C. Delta T or whatever that changes the speed of light. So here we are in our little happy solar system, right? And the quality of our consciousness is so low that, we just, our egos are huge. Our fear is huge. So we spend a lot of our time trying to figure out how we can rip each other off, how we can get all the marbles, how we can steal, somebody else's oil, whatever. We want to, we want to bully our way through to make sure we get ours. We get ours and somebody else's too, because that's the way it is, The tough win and the weak lose. Mm-hmm. So that's the nature of our reality. And if we were to easily be able to colonize other planets and the stars, we'd take that same ethic with us wherever we went, right? You'd have Darth Vader, breathing through his mask all over the universe, because that's the way we are. Now, why can't we do that? Why is it almost impossible for us to do that? Because the speed of light is such that you get to the nearest star, takes you 4.5 light years at light speed, and you can't go light speed. That's the other thing. Einstein says that's as fast as you can go from one pixel to the next, to the next, to the next through space. You can't go any faster than that. It's the speed limit. And if it takes you 4.5 years at light speed, well, even if you could go half light speed, which is way faster than we can imagine ever going, now that's 9 years just to go to the nearest star. That may not take you to any planet, you see. So to go out into the universe that we can see, oh yeah, we could explore out there. It would only take us, let's see, 6 million years, to get to, well, our lifespans and the way we work, 6 million years is a long time to take a trip, It makes space travel just about practically impossible, because light speed is so slow compared to how big the universe is. So even at light speed, it takes forever. It's like, would you ever go visit your neighbor if it took you, 400 years to get to their house? You probably wouldn't try, would you? There's no point. It would be your great-great-great-great-grandchildren that arrived, and by the time they arrived, you would have even forgotten that anybody left to go there. You see? So it's just about impractical for us to do that. Well, that's probably good. I don't think we're quite ready to send out on the universe just yet. We need to grow up a bit. So let's say that we grow up and we become full of love and peace and high quality of consciousness, such that this interacting with the rest of the universe is something now we're old enough, we're grown up enough to do. It's like now we're toddlers and they don't want us to play in the street, so they lock the gate, right? Well, what could the larger consciousness system do? Hey, it could just, increase the delta T, it could make things. So now the speed of light just got faster by, let's say, 1,000. Okay, so now what would take us 1,000 years, we could do in a year. See, 1,000 light years now are just a year. Suddenly the universe becomes accessible. You see, suddenly it's not inaccessible. So there may be, and I'm just making up possibilities. Okay. I'm just saying that the system could very well have isolated us with the light speed that we have, and with the the pixels and the delta T that we have, because that keeps us from terrorizing the neighborhood, so to speak, until we're ready. So indeed, light speed might not only not be constant, but it may change dramatically one day. We may wake up and find out that the speed of light is a whole lot faster. Now, what would that do to our everyday world? Nothing. You see?
Right.
It would just mean, because everything now would be in higher resolution, basically. All the pixels would be closer together. You see, everything's a lot higher resolution. It has to go a lot faster because you got a lot more pixels. Where you had 2 pixels that were next to each other, now there's 1,000 pixels there. You see, to take that same. So now our light speed, you see, from pixel to pixel, it's got to go a lot faster. So we have the delta V over delta T. Okay, now the delta V has to either get bigger or the delta T has to get smaller.
Gotcha.
And the light speed goes up. Well, you don't want the delta V to get bigger because now you're getting big sloppy pixels, right? So what will happen is that the delta T will get smaller and smaller and C will go up. And at that point, we may have 1,000 orders of magnitude, increase in the speed of light, and suddenly the universe becomes some place we can get to. We can go 1,000 light years away in a year instead of 1,000 years, which is crazy. Like I say, 1,000 years go by. Imagine we send off a rocket ship and they don't get there for 1,000 years. Okay, who would care 1,000 years later? Who would even remember that they left? You see, it's so long. The times are so big that it's just impractical. It doesn't work.
Would you mind if we take like 10 for a second right here, just to stand up or walk around, go to the bathroom and whatnot?
Okay.
Cool.
I don't mind at all. Take 10.
Thanks, mate. Much obliged.
We having fun?
Yeah. This was
so.
actually. I didn't predict that you were going to go into this detail, and this is exciting. Actually, I really didn't see this one coming. So this is. I like it. It means that we're gonna. I don't know, because you brought up so much that it makes me sort of want to conjure a lot more with, well, where are we really? Because the physical, and I don't want to go there now because I really have to go to the bathroom. But take a step outside.